Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am your host, Chris White. This is the LinkedIn Live program for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders. And folks, in case there's any doubt, these are live conversations. This is not pre-recorded. And as I like to say, by design, these are unrehearsed, unscripted, and unpredictable. I'm incredibly excited to welcome this week's guest. I get the chance to get to know a lot of the people that have been on my show, and I've become friends with people. But Brian's actually someone that I've gotten to know over the past couple of years, and someone that I can sincerely call a friend. We've actually met in person for quite a few times at this point. He's a director of solution consulting with ServiceNow, one of my favorite companies, because I was an investor for a long time. They helped me put my kids through college. Brian, my friend, how are you, sir? Welcome. Good to see you.
Doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. It's a delight. It's a delight. So, Brian, I just introduced you. You're the director of pre-sales, and there's, the ServiceNow organization is a large organization. Do you mind just taking a minute and sort of introducing a little bit more broadly yourself and the role that you currently have with ServiceNow?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like Chris said, I lead one of our solution consulting, tech engineering, pre-sales, and every company calls it something a little bit different, organizations within ServiceNow, especially organization within the technology workflows. So anything around operations, security, asset management, strategic portfolio management, and we kind of dabble a little bit going cross workflow. My team is responsible for leading those technical conversations, anything from a POV to discovery to, basically the 6 habits, right? The things that we do day in and day out from a pre-sales perspective. And I've been here since about 2015. A little interesting metric. Back when I joined, we were a little under 3,500 employees, and we were under $1 billion in revenue. Fast forward to today, like we can't talk about earnings yet, right? Obviously for Q1, but as of December of 2021, we were 5.8 billion in revenue, 17,000 employees. Just that massive hyper growth was it's been a really, really fun ride. It's been one I've had to, retighten my seatbelt a few times and make sure that I don't fall off the rocket ship like we like to say, but it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed
That's awesome. So I just want to make sure I've got these statistics right. So you joined in 2015 and there were 3,500 employees.
Correct.
And now fast forward about 7 years and you're at how many employees?
17,000 plus.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really good.
It's awesome.
The only thing, so I have to admit, so I invested in ServiceNow in all sincerity. I can't remember when it was, probably about the time you joined, 2015, 16, something like that. And I held on to it for a couple of years. It was doing really well, but I thought, well, how long is this going to last? So I sold. And now I'm realizing that maybe I should have held on a little while. By the way, Brian, I have to give you some props. You are already getting a fair amount of love for some folks. Nadia has said hello, as did Michael Forbes. Michael, nice to see you. And of course, Lillian also said hello. So folks, thank you so much for tuning in. By the way, we welcome any comments or questions. We can't see how many people are out there. Obviously, we've got a few folks out there. If you have any questions or comments for Brian or myself, of course, don't hesitate to ask. We always love to have some interaction, and just delighted to see you with us. So Brian, I wanted to start by asking you, because it's so interesting to me how people found their way to pre-sales. And I know you've got an interesting story. Do you mind sharing how it is that you found yourself into this role called pre-sales?
Absolutely. And I'll try to keep it under 30 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. By trade, I'm an electrical engineer, right? I went to school for electrical engineering and computer science. So I've always taken stuff apart. And I thought naturally that meant that I needed to go build things, right? I needed to go build physical things like a phone or something like that, right? So I went through that schooling and got out, worked for Lockheed Martin for a while, built a whole bunch of stuff, can't talk about, but it was a lot of fun. And I quickly realized through one of at the time I didn't know it, but pre-sales engineers that was selling to me, I was his customer, had no idea that he was in pre-sales, had no idea that he was selling to me. It goes to show how good he was at it. And we just started talking one time, like when we were going through, we were doing a POV, didn't know that's proof of value, didn't know that's what it was called at the time. Going through POV, and he was like, you know what? You're pretty good at this talking. You're pretty good at this getting to know people. You seem to like to go and figure out where Chris's pain points are and figure out how you can help solve them with what you're selling at that given point in time. And he's like, what do you think about trying it? Right. And I was like, you know what? You're telling me that I can go travel to my customers. I can go meet a lot of different people. I can have different conversations every day. I can, provide for my family in a very meaningful way. And I can do all of these things and have a blast doing it from the entire time that I start working to the time I stop working every day. Yeah, sign me up. Let's go. So that's when I joined Hewlett Packard and in their software division, and the rest is history. So
and what year was that? I'm asking you to date yourself a little bit. What year was that?
When did I join HP? That would have been 2007 or 2009.
Okay. Yeah. So you've been doing this for at least a dozen years. Now, it sounds like you were very enthusiastic about the job. There were a lot of things about it that seemed very, very appealing. Was there anything about the role that you were sort of apprehensive about, or maybe not so sure about?
At the time, getting up and presenting in front of people.
Really?
As an engineer, right, you don't get taught that, right? You don't get taught how to get up and do a presentation, how to connect with someone, how to read a room, all those soft skills. You don't get taught that stuff. So that piece of it was, I was curious how I was going to learn that, who was going to help me. And one of the, just to give you an example, one of the best ways I've found in order to get around anything, not just that one specific topic, is the mentors that are around you. The people that are around you that are in a space that you're not in, that you want to get into. I guarantee you there's someone out there that's willing to share their experience, and you can learn from them. Right? There's no reason that you need to repeat the same failures or same mistakes that they did. Learn from what they did and apply that to what you're going to do going forward. So that was really the only big one that was a big question mark in my head. There's a lot of them now that I wish I would have known, but it is what it is.
Well, and I'm going to dig into that in a minute. But what for you? What were some of the lessons that you learned along the way, or what were some of those key moments where you sort of had that mindset shift, like, okay, I need to be doing it this way?
I think one would have been failing fast, right? I always initially, when I first got into pre-sales, you would go into a meeting and you would have an agenda of what you want to get across. And some of the times that's just not what the people wanted to talk about, whether or not someone didn't do good enough discovery, whether it was you or someone else, or, whatever it was, or you're passionate about something, because I was very passionate about the technology that I was selling, right?
Which is a good thing.
But being able to stop, pivot, and move to what the customer or whoever you're talking to actually cares about, critical. It's critical to be able to do that and be able to notice it quickly.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. I don't remember when. I know. I had a guest on in the past, I don't know, month or so, and one of the things that he or she said is we need to be willing to let go of our agenda, right? Precisely. Absolutely. The word that you used. I mean, particularly, look, we plan and we prepare and we practice, at least ideally, right? Yeah. And we go into a meeting with, to your term, with our agenda. But the more we stay fixated on our agenda, particularly if, it turns out that their expectations are a little bit different.
Yeah.
Are there is there advice that you give to people that maybe struggle with doing that?
I try to have an open dialogue and conversation with them. I'll give an example of someone that I was mentoring recently that was having trouble with this exact topic. And we were trying to figure out what are the reasons why that they're having trouble shifting. And it was because they weren't able to be, I'll use a comedy term. They weren't able to be ad hoc. They weren't able to do it on the fly, right? They weren't able to get up and, I don't know if you ever watched Whose Line Is It Anyways, right? But in Whose Line Is It Anyway, you get a topic and they have to come up and do a stand-up comedy pitch, right?
Interesting.
In order to do that, I suggested, and we found a course this individual could go take on how to do stand-up comedy. Literally how to go do stand-up comedy so that they could be on the fly. So they could shift and go wherever they needed to go in order to have that conversation, because they were the technical expert, right? They know the technology inside and out. It's the ability in order to be comfortable with silence, right? It's to be comfortable with not actually knowing everything that's going on in Chris's head right now and be able to read him and read the room in order to be able to shift. And if you look at the best comedics that are out there, they can do that. They can do it in a heartbeat, and they can always engage the entire room.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yep.
No, it's really good. I love this. In fact, I mean, I've drawn this analogy before, like a good improv, comedian, use whatever you're given, right? Like work with whatever you're given. And if they're going in this direction, all right, then, let's go in that direction. By the way, there's a few of the people that are saying hello. So we just needed to acknowledge, I think this was Hasnain. I hope I'm saying that right.
Hey, Haas.
Eric Cray is giving you a shout out. Christopher Walker is saying we need to meet up, and Nadia is acknowledging your point there. Customer needs to get value from every meeting. It's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that, Nadia. I always took the attitude of every time I met with somebody, I wanted that 30 to 60 minutes to be a valuable use of their time, whether we got the deal or not, right? I mean, look, we're here for you. We're here to make this beneficial. Michael Forbes has asked a question, which I'll bring. Can you talk about your involvement experience with the PSC and what you envision for your micro community within the PSC? Interesting question. You and I, and Michael, thank you for the question. Brian, you and I were chatting about this just the other day. Do you just care to share a thought, since it's front of mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you that don't know, Chris and I and two others founded the Washington DC chapter of the PreSales Collective, and that has shifted a little bit on kind of how they actually go to market with that. So we both are now still very involved in the collective, but we use it more of me personally, I use it for recruiting. I use it for finding other mentors. I use it for throwing ideas out there and questions. So if anyone is ever wondering, why the heck is Crosby thinking that? Well, you might be able to go on the PreSales Collective and on their Slack channel and be, oh, he asked that question. Here's all the responses he got, right? So, so the future of it, I would highly encourage reaching out to James Kakis and Yuji and that team, and Chris and I as well. But it's gonna shift a little bit. It's gonna shift more from us locally leading it and curating activities to us creating demand gen in order to bring people to that community and continue to build and foster that. So I think they're up to like 10,000 strong or something like that now. Right,
yeah,
Chris?
it might even be 15. Yeah,
15,000 strong. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I echo those words completely. I mean, the one thought that I had is that even though the PSC doesn't have local chapters and they're sort of managing things, low or sort of centrally, I guess, they have encouraged local participants, local members to get together. And I'm out here in Leesburg. I know, Brian, you're in Fairfax. Maybe between the two of us, we can organize a happy hour sometime this summer. Maybe somewhere in the middle, and throw an invitation out there and just bring some folks together.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So,
one other thing to just add to it real quick that just popped in my head is everything that Chris and I just stated, and anything within your career, you have to think globally and execute locally, right? So the thing that the PSC does very, very well, those 15,000 individuals that are out there, that's a global organization that you can go tap on, right? How you execute that locally is 100% up to you, right? 100% up to you on how you're going to do that, how you're going to take back all that feedback. So I would just encourage everyone to be thinking that way, is to leverage that, think globally and execute locally.
Well, and hearing you say that, Brian, that's 100% on you. That's a good segue into talking a little bit about now your role in management. And I know, you've got very much look, you need to take ownership of your career. If it's in fact, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you. I attended something years ago with my kids when they were young, one of these talks for kids, and it was a puppet show or something. And the guy, when he finished, he said, these 10 two-letter words will change your life. If it is to be, it is up to me. How good is that? Awesome. Now talk a little bit about your thoughts, your principles, your approach to management and empowering your people to really own their own success.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start with my first tenet. It's got to be fun. Full
I
stop.
love that, man. I love that.
If you are not having fun with what you're doing, we need, and if anyone's listening to this that's within my organization, let's have a chat, right? Or if you're not, I'm more than willing to have a chat with you as well, right? It's got to be fun. You got to enjoy what you're doing. We spend way too much time with our work family and our work individuals, our work colleagues, and doing what we all love to do. If you're not having fun with it, maybe there needs to be a shift, right? Maybe it's just one little thing that you got to change, but you got to be vocal about it. You got to bring it up. You got to let your your leaders know, because they're not psychics. They're not going to know exactly what's going on in your head. So if you're not having fun, make it known that you're not having fun and the reasons why, so that we can try to help make it fun, right? So I would say that's first, right? The other piece is, like you said, I'm a big advocate of you and your own career, and that's not me saying I'm not going to do anything for any of my people in order to help grow them.
Of course.
Complete opposite, right? Complete opposite. You own your career in order to bring that forward to your manager, your leader, in order to say, this is what I think I want to go do. What do you think about it? Where do you see me in the organization? Where do you see me going in 2 to 3 years? What have you witnessed, right? Because our hardest critic of ourselves is ourselves, right? So
True.
Getting a full 360 view on what other people see about you and how your benefit to the organization is something that is what I mean by you own your own career, right? You own that feedback. You own reaching out to other people to figure out how you're doing, what you're doing. Chris, you and I have never worked professionally in pre-sales, but I ask you for advice all the time, right? Same thing, right? I've got this. You have to have this network around you that is owning your career. It's owning where you want to go and what you want to do going forward.
Yeah. Well, and it's also having a vision, right? It's being self-aware, it's having a vision. And I love the fact that you use the term being vocal about it. That's a big part of it, right? I mean, you can't sit back and just assume that your manager or, your supervisors sort of know what you want and what you're trying to accomplish, right? Like you've got to take ownership and be vocal about it. By the way, it's really hard to keep up with all the comments are just flying through. So it's hard to keep up. And folks, I appreciate all the comments. By the way, there's one from a gentleman, Sean Meyer, says he's trying to break into the SE role. So Sean, I can't tell you, strongly enough, keep going. It's a great profession, and anything that we can do to help you, of course. Brian, talk a little bit about when you made the shift to management. At what point did you decide I'm ready to go from individual contributor to manager? And then what were some of the lessons you learned in the early days of being a manager?
Oh yeah, it's a big question. So at first, I've always wanted to go into leadership ever since I got out of college. Things I did in college, things I did right after college. I was in the engineering leadership development program at Lockheed Martin. I was part of a group called the Incredibles at HP that are for individuals that aren't in leadership yet, but they want to kind of learn like what that looks like and everything. Yeah. And I'm going to, this is full open kimono, and me being honest here, I thought I was ready for it a lot quicker than the people that were going to promote me into it. Right. And I, if Jeff Margulies, a few others that are out there that have been mentors of mine over the years, they'll attest to it. Right. I thought I was ready. And the thing that I'll say, one of the lessons learned is I wasn't, right? I absolutely was not ready. And there was a reason that I was still getting coaching. I was still getting professional development. I was getting asked to go do this, and this. There's a good reason for it, right? So anyone that's out there that's looking to go from an individual contributor to a leader, and you're getting told, hey, not quite yet, go do this, go do that. Listen, right? Listen. And there's a reason people are telling you that, right? And if you really don't fully embody the reasons why, ask more questions, right? Ask questions again of that network that I talked about earlier, that 360-degree feedback that you're getting. Figure out what it is and why someone's saying that, right? So I'll start with that. But when I finally did make the move, it was for the right time and the right reason, right? It was at ServiceNow when I was an individual contributor for our federal team. I was an enterprise architect for all the federal, and really focusing on the operations products, right? That's been my background for a long time. Sure. It's been data center technologies, racking and stacking, monitoring, performance network management, all that good stuff, right? So when I did make the shift, it was my current leader, right? He was like, hey, I think there's this role that looks about right for you. It looks like it's the right timing. I think you're ready. I think it fits where you want to go long term, right? Not just one move, long term.
Yeah.
And I'll get into that next. It fits your goals long term that I had shared with him very vocally on what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. And I went for it. It was a very long process, and I ended up getting it. And here we are today.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you took over that team, first of all, roughly how many folks did you have on your team?
I think at the time there was about four or five folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a small team. And in hindsight, what were some of the lessons that you learned in those early days of managing that small team?
Good question. A few things. Like number one, being a first-time leader for anyone, right? Going from individual contributor to a leader, be personal about your interaction with your people, right? And I don't mean like it's like ask them a whole bunch of program questions. I mean, see how they're doing, right? Don't start your one-on-ones with, hey, where's the business? How you doing with the business? Where's the number? Like, what are you doing in order to advance yourself? Don't start with that stuff, right? Start with how they're doing as a person. Start with, hey, Chris, how's your family? Know what their kids' names are. Know what they like to do. Like, make it more personal, because that's not just it's going to help you in many ways, right? Making it personal, not necessarily about the business. That'd be one. The other one is I'll go back to something you and I had chatted about recently, is the value of what we're asking for, right? As a leader, I've got a saying that you can't expect out of your people what you can't inspect, right? So I'll say it again. You can't expect from your people what you can't inspect. And that's at all levels of leadership, right? And I don't mean go out there and create a whole bunch of new KPIs, OKRs, MBOs, whatever you want to call it. What I mean is, if you're asking your people to do something and you don't have the value on the reason you're doing it, you have no way of measuring improvement or degradation, then why are you asking your people to go do it, right? There's no reason to go do that. So everything that you're flowing down your team, make sure that you understand that part of it and understand the value and the reasons why I'm going to go ask Chris to go off and go do this, and that I can measure improvement on that.
Yeah. It's so powerful. And I want to go back to the first thing you said, and you likely have heard me say this. One of my favorite sayings is that people buy from people, and we need to be authentic in our roles as sales professionals and sales engineers. To your point, the same holds true for being an effective leader, right? At the end of the day, they say that people don't leave companies, people leave people, right? People leave individuals. What I hear you saying is that it's the same thing. Like, first and foremost, we need to be people working with people and make it personal, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. And then the second part of that, it's just so powerful to me, is if you expect it, make sure you inspect it. And I think the key point there is be clear about the why, about why this is important. How is it going to be measured, right? And what difference is making? Because I sincerely do believe at the end of the day that we all seek, of course, we're all trying to take care of our families, right? We're all fiscally motivated, as I like to say. Yep. But I also believe that we all truly want to believe that we're making a difference, truly believe that we're making a contribution.
Absolutely.
And it's just so powerful.
Yeah. Go Chris, ahead. I would just say on that last point, right, on making a difference, make sure that, like, for all the leaders that are out there, that you're telling your people the reasons why they're making a difference and how they're making a difference. Just like you're expecting your folks, in order to be vocal about where they want to go, what they want to do, goes both ways. You need to also let them know how they're doing and what they're doing, being vocal when they're doing a really good job and the impact they're actually making to the organization. It is very, 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 very critical. And don't wait for an annual cycle. Don't wait for a quarterly review. Don't wait for those times. When it happens, immediately let them know, and let a broad ecosystem know that they're doing a great job and the reasons why they're doing a good job.
Yeah. If you could go back and talk to the Brian Crosby who just took over that small team, is there anything that you would tell him if you could, wind the clock back 5 or 6 years?
Yeah. Stop focusing on what's right in front of you. Focus on what's out a couple of quarters, a couple of years, and where the team actually needs to go and what they need to do. And that's both from a business perspective, that's both from an individual perspective for every single person that's on that team, and that's also from internally on what is my vision for where this team actually wants to go.
Man, that is honestly, we could end the conversation right there, and I think everybody would get their money's worth from that comment right there. Look beyond what's right in front of you. But by the way, Brian, I don't know if you see the chat or not, but the chat is just blowing up between
Yeah.
Lillian and Shad McNair. Chimed in. Pre-sales is the best career. Molly Clark, Lillian, Christian, folks, love all the discussion taking place. And by all means, if you have any specific questions for Brian or myself, but please don't hesitate to ask. Brian, I want to continue the conversation. I know just recently you've moved from managing a team of pre-sale, really elite pre-sales contributors, individual contributors, to now a director position. So now you're leading people who are leading people. Do you care to elaborate a little bit on that progression for you and some of the lessons you've learned at this next stage in your career?
Yeah, I'll say two things real quick to preface all of that is two of the hardest transitions that I personally think that anyone's going to make in their career is going from an individual contributor to a leader, first-line leader. And by the way, a first-line leader is the hardest job that I think that's out there, and I still stand by that today. And then the second one is going from a first-line leader to a second line. After that, I've been told that it's a lot of the same, right? There's a lot of similarities on when you go to third, fourth, if you have aspirations.
I can see. I mean, that resonates with me.
Yeah. It's a lot of similarities, but I would say, some of the lessons learned that I've seen so far is, and I'll go back to the guy that just took over the first leadership job, and I do see the comments now. So thanks, Chris, for pointing that out. Some of the people that are on there I know are first line leaders. One of the things that I wish I would have done early on is the programmatics of the business. Understanding what it is that what the operating rhythm of your business is, and put the programmatics in place early for that team. That will save you so much time going forward. Making sure you know what your rhythm of the business is, making sure you know when you're going to do XYZ meeting, making sure you know what the sales cycle looks like for whatever business that you're running, right? And making that very vocal and communicate that down to your teams is, I think, incredibly important. And I wish I would have done that earlier, but it's even more important now, right? Now going from where I had, 11 or so individual contributors, now I've got 31 right now and 4 leaders. It's different, and being able to lay out what it is that I expect again, but leaving it up to those leaders to go figure out how they're going to go execute that locally, right? I get a chance to hear what my boss's boss, and everyone else's what they want of the organization. I have to internalize that, and then I have to go off and expect that of my team. But I'm not going to go tell them how to go do that. I'm going to go tell them, here's the things that I expect. I can help you get there if you need a mentor, if you need some advice or whatever it is. But I'm not going to go and say, go do 1, 2, and 3, right? Yeah. So I'm going to look at the end, and how they get there is up to them, and I'm there to help them and support them.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that. I mean, I've heard it said that if you hold people accountable for the methods, then you can't actually hold them accountable for the results, because they're just doing what you told them to do, right? But the reverse is true and more powerful. Hold them accountable for results. Give them the guidance as necessary, right? Yeah. Give them the support and the resources, but let them come up with the methods and the how. So I think that's really powerful. I want to make sure you use the word programmatics. I want to make sure that people get what you're saying there. I'm interpreting that as sort of the mechanics, the structure, maybe reporting, KPIs, et cetera. How would you describe, or could you elaborate on the use of that term, the programmatics?
Yeah. So people, process, technology, right? I'll keep to those 3 things. So the people know when and who is in what cycle within your team, right? Everyone's got a plan. Hopefully, I'm talking to all the leaders that are out there. Hopefully you have an individual development plan for every single person that's on your team. And I'm not talking about putting something just in the Word doc and then putting it away for a year and coming back in January and say, hey, how'd we do? Check. No. I'm saying you've got a plan in your head that you're constantly going back to and thinking about when you're thinking, hey, I know that, like, for instance, one of our big conferences is Knowledge. It's coming up at ServiceNow. All right, who do I know that I want to get up on that stage in order to be a thought leader, right? So that's part of the programmatics. You know when those things are going to happen, and you know who is probably best in order to go do that and be ahead of that and already know that you're going to do that and have a tickler on your calendar when you got to get it done. So have that for every single one of your people, right? That accounts for yourself as well. Have the programmatics around what you need to do throughout that year. And then I like to look 2 and 3 years out, right, on kind of where it is that you in 3 years, if you have a wish, where do you want the organization that you're leading to be, and work your way backwards from that. And you're not going to be able to do that on your own, obviously, right? You're going to have to talk to, again, that 360-degree mentor network that you got on kind of where you want to go and pressure test some things and come back and adjust. But you've got that plan on over the course of 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years on kind of what you're going to do personally in order to get to that goal of whatever team it is that you're leading, right? So that's the people. The process, that one's kind of self-explanatory, right? So where's the common collaboration environment that your team's going to use? What is the communication strategy look like? If someone, I'll give you an example. If people reach out to me on text, they know they're going to get a response very quickly, right? That's on purpose. If you call me or if you email me or you Teams me, we use Teams internally, Teams me, you know it's going to be hit or miss. But if you text me, that's critical path and it's going to get a response almost immediately. And then, so understanding that and being vocal about that from a process perspective is really important. And the technology, because we're all in pre-sales, right? You got to know what's happening within whatever you are selling, right? You got to know what does the roadmap look like, and how are you going to be a part of that in order to make sure that what's coming out is actually going to be what your customers value and what they actually need in order to get to whatever mission is that they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah. I am so glad I asked you to elaborate. That was really done. People, process, and tools. I mean, that really is the foundation. Incidentally, I may have to invite Lillian onto the show. She's got some great thoughts as well. Lillian shared, know how to network. Don't be afraid to ask help. Know your team and resources, and seek to learn more. Again, that's a bit of a mic drop from Lillian. Thank you for sharing that, Lillian. Incidentally, Christian asked a question. Did your direct reports or leaders give you the gray beard? Now, I don't know. We left kids out of the equation as well. So I'm not sure. What's that?
I'll give Christian a little call. He worked for me for 4 years. And yes, Christian, this is mostly you. Okay. So
absolutely classic. Something you said, actually, you touched on this a couple of times, and I'm inspired to quote double click on it. You mentioned something about know yourself, have a plan for yourself. I've heard it said that if you want to be a leader of people, if you want to be a leader of teams, you have to be a leader of yourself first.
Absolutely.
Is there anything in particular that you do to be a better leader of yourself?
I ask others to challenge me.
Interesting. In what regard? In what context?
Well, kind of like what Lillian was saying, right? So don't be afraid to ask for help. Goes every which way. Doesn't matter where you are in the organization. Ask for help, right? So I ask people to hold me accountable to things, right? If I say I'm going to go, I'll give you an example, right? So reading a book now, and there's a group of us that are doing that. I'm like, hold me accountable to make sure that it's actually happening. And let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about it on a one-on-one. Let's talk about it ad hocly. Let's go get a drink. Let's go get dinner. Let's go get lunch, whatever it is. Hold me accountable to it, right? And then that also applies, hopefully, that I build teams that are very open and it's a trusting space, psychological safety, basically, within the team in order to bring things up and challenge it in a constructive way. Obviously, don't just call me and say, what the heck's going on, Brian? Why are you doing this and this way? Do it in a constructive way. But hopefully that comes back as well to challenge me, which makes me think differently and probably shift that plan that I was talking about from a year, 2 years, 3 years. So bringing those things forward and making sure that everyone's got the space in order to talk about it is incredibly important. And bring those challenges back to your leaders, and don't be afraid, because they want to hear it. I guarantee you they want to hear it. And if they don't, then there's probably something else we should talk about, right?
Yeah.
So,
That's really good. Really good. I had another thought while you were talking, and that is, I can imagine people looking at you saying, well, Brian, I mean, it's just sort of come easy for you. I mean, you wanted to be in management right out of school, and you were an electrical engineer, and you're just driven. And I suspect that there have been moments in your career, as courageous as you've been, and as I would say assertive as you've been with your career. My guess is that there have probably been moments where maybe you've had your own doubts or fears or uncertainties. Can you share maybe some of the fears or concerns that you've had, and how you have pushed through that?
One of the ones that every leader is always going to have, especially in a hyper growth mode like ServiceNow's been, is what is my value to the team? What is my value? Let's say you're going from individual contributor to leader. I was the tech expert. I was the guy that knew everyone in this account, guy or person or whoever, that knew everyone in the account. I had all the connections. I knew what the roadmap was, where they were going.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to go to a leader. What's my value back to the team? How am I going to go help them? Right. Same thing applies when I took, the director role. What's my value to the team? What's my value now to the leaders in order to help them and help them grow? Right. So one of the ways that I push through that is, one of my mentors told me a while ago, is know your blind spots. Right. And if you know your blind spots and you are actively asking people to identify them, again, it goes back to challenging you, right? And you know what those things are, those two first pieces kind of take care of themselves, right? If you know what your blind spots are and you know that you're addressing them, you're going to be providing value to the team. You might not think you are, right? You might, that whole term imposter syndrome that's out there, right? You might still feel like you're an imposter in someone else's shoes, but if you're doing the right things, you're getting the feedback, you're truly valuing who it is that you're talking to and making changes in yourself and the team and everyone else, then those things are going to take care of themselves, right? For the most part. So I would say making sure that you're always asking for feedback and always finding your blind spots and acting on those two things as soon as you get it will help you in the long term.
Such good advice. Such good advice. Well, and I'm inspired to even take that just a half a step further. Just know yourself, right? I mean, there is so much power in self-awareness. So it looks like we might have a question here, or maybe a comment. Having recently transitioned to orgs for the first time, owning your own path by networking, creating relationships, and not being afraid to ask questions and seek help. Richard, very well said, sir. Thank you for sharing. That's actually a good segue to one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Brian. When you and I visited recently, you mentioned that one of the challenges that you've put out to your team is building champions and really becoming invested in helping to build the pipeline. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that, I've noticed as in myself as well, as you get more disconnected from direct customer interactions, is you forget the importance of not just understanding the technology, but building a champion inside of an account, right? So we all have our own network of individuals that are out there. I've got individuals that I met back when I was first at HP that have jumped from 4 different companies, right? That I have sold into 4 different times, right? They continue to come back because they know that I'm not going to just sell them something to sell them something. They're going to come back because they trust me. Again, what you said, Chris, people buy from people. They trust me. They know that I've got their best interest at heart. But you do that by building champions in your account base, right? And you do that by not just champions at a C level or a CXO level, director level, anywhere in the organization. Anyone that's willing to talk to you, anyone that's willing to actually sit down and have a face-to-face like this, or go grab a coffee, figure out what it is that's going to make them successful in what they're doing, right? And continually do that and have a cadence. So I've got a tickler on my calendar every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. that I go off and I build a net new champion. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a customer I'm trying to sell into. It might be something I'm trying to grow myself in, right? I'm trying to think of an example, but I can't think of one off the cuff. But having that programmatic cadence for yourself on when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, build that champion so that they're a long-time customer of not the company you work for, but they're a long-time customer of you. They're a long-time customer of Chris because they know that he's always going to have the best interest at heart.
Yeah. Well, and something you mentioned, Brian, I think is really important. And that is because I think there are a lot, I suspect there's a lot of pre-sales professionals out there who are probably uncomfortable with the idea of building champions because they perceive that as selling. And to your point, building champions is not selling. it's building relationship. It's creating alignment, right? It's building trust.
Yep.
If they have a need at some point, who are they likely going to come talk to? Right. So to me, there's a big difference between building champions, building rapport and relationships, and selling. This is not sell. I mean, this is an important part of the sales profession, but to me, it really is about building relationship.
Absolutely. And we all got to, and the champion program that we put out, one of my leaders actually, he built the program out. We're now executing it programmatically across my whole org. And that piece of it is so important, and it leads to your point, so much more than just selling at the end of the day. Sometimes I've got a story from one of the individual contributors where they built one 2 years ago, and now they're personal friends, and they go to the gym together. They go do all these other things together. It has nothing to do with business, has nothing to do with selling. They created a friend, right? They created someone that was in alignment with them. So it's important.
Yeah, no, it's great. That's great. Lillian asked a question, which is a good one. What are your thoughts on remote versus hybrid versus on-site personas? And I'm not exactly sure what she means by personas, but I'll just sort of interpret how, building relationships, hybrid, remote, on-site, et cetera. I certainly have an opinion, curious to see what your thoughts are, Brian.
Yeah. You got to meet the person where they're at. Just full stop, right? So I don't really care if it's remote, hybrid, or on site. Obviously, if you're across the table from someone, you're going to be able to build a better relationship than over Zoom. It's just how it's going to be. I can't tell you how many courses over the past 2 years to try to figure out how I can read Chris over Zoom. And it's just very difficult to do, right? Because all you get is this, you get this, right? That's it. So building a relationship and being across from someone and being able to look them in the eye and talk to them is much, much different than it is being remote or in a hybrid world. Sure. That said, it's about the person. Again, you got to know where they are and what they're comfortable with, right? I'm comfortable getting out there right now, but the person I'm meeting with might not be. And you've got to, and the one thing that I'll say is you have to ask the question. Make sure that that's the question you ask first, and don't be afraid to ask the question. Don't assume that they're okay with shaking your hand. Don't assume that they're okay with meeting face to face, or the reverse is true as well. Don't assume that they don't want to meet face to face, right? That could be the only way that they like to do business is face to face, and that's maybe the reason why you haven't broken into XYZ account. You never know. But don't be afraid to ask that question. So, and meet them where they are.
I'm so inspired by some of the things you said. First of all, you use the words meet them where they are. And obviously there's a very physical interpretation of that or literal interpretation of that. There's also another interpretation of that. One of the things I like to say is feed people what they're hungry for, right? When you're going in to give a presentation, when you're having a conversation, right? Like meet them where they, another way of saying meet them where they are, feed them what they're hungry for. Well, how do we know what they're hungry for until we listen and pay attention, right? Mm-hmm. And you also follow that with saying, don't assume this, or don't assume that they don't want to meet. Don't assume that they do want to meet, right? I'll even put the period right after the word assume, right? Yeah. I mean, one of the mistakes that we make in this profession is we make too many assumptions. So no, that's really powerful. It's interesting for me, Brian. I know, being very transparent. I think if I can use the term, friendship really elevated when we finally met in person. And look, over the past couple of years, I'm guessing you're the same way. I've made countless new relationships with people who, honestly, at this point, they're business relationships that have become on a very personal level. We know about each other's families and wives and things that we do but we've never met in person, right? Yeah. So I think the world is changing a little bit. I do believe that we can make very good working relationships, even personal relationships, through the lens of a camera, as I like to say. That being said, there's no doubt that it elevates when we meet in person. By the way, Lillian chimed in, being an honest, reliable resource builds trust. People like to know that they can count on you. Very, very well said. Question from Sean Myers. I'll paraphrase. How do you get noticed for this position and my unique skill set and battle the imposter syndrome? Sean, I have a thought, but before I go there, Brian, let's just paraphrase Sean's question for anybody out there who maybe is, quote, at the moment on the outside of this profession looking in, thinking themselves, man, I sort of like where you were when you were at Lockheed Martin, thinking, wow, that looks like a really good profession for me. What advice do you give for people who maybe are trying to crack in, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with number one, what Sean's doing today. Joining something like this, getting to know, you've got a list, you can see all the comments, Sean. You see the people that are in there, connect with them, talk to them, figure out what anyone that's willing to reach out to you, and reach out to me, Sean. I'm more than willing to have a conversation with you about it. That's one of the best ways in order to break in is just join things like this, join things like the PreSales Collective. Go to, if you have a industry that you're specific that you want to go into pre-sales in, find out what the industry events are and just go and talk to all the vendors that are going to be there, because everyone that's at that show, they're in pre-sales. They're in pre-sales that are sitting at that booth for all the companies that you might want to work for. Go in and just meet them. I can't tell you how many times I've actually hired personally people that have come to an event like that and just came specifically to network with ServiceNow. They wanted to come and they wanted to figure out how, number one, how they could get in. They wanted to get to know me. They wanted to get to know the technology more, but they used that as the venue in order to do it, right? That's a great way to get in. All of that said, have your ducks in a row. Make sure you know what you're talking about. Make sure you know why you're talking about it. Don't just come and say, hey, Brian, I want to talk to you about getting into ServiceNow. I'm like, okay, well, why? And if you don't have a good answer to that first question, we're probably not going to go much further than that, right? Just do your homework, have everything in a row, make sure that you know the reason why you're going to talk to someone. And a lot of the times when you do that research and you have your list of stuff that you want to talk down, that imposter syndrome, Sean, will just kind of go away because you've done your homework, you know what you want to talk about. And a lot of the times it's going to come across as you know more than the person that you're talking to, which is the exact place that you want to be in.
Yeah, that's awesome. By the way, I see Molly and Nadia are providing him some information as well. So looks like he's already made a couple of good connections.
Awesome.
It reminds me of something that I wanted to ask you. One of our recent conversations, you mentioned to me some questions that you asked during the interview process. There was one in particular that you said tends to be tough for some people. Is that something you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, I will. I'll share it. So one of the ones that we go through all the standards, right? We go through what are the reasons you're doing this. Give me some of your background. We dig in a little bit here and there, right? And if it doesn't come up at the end, I will always ask the question of, all right, pretend I'm interviewing you, Chris. Chris, you came on, you're doing great. You're doing great things. We have a 360 review 6 months from now. I'm your direct boss. How are you going to measure success in your role 6 months from now? And I asked that to the interviewee, right? A lot of it, sometimes we get really good answers. Sometimes we get, and we get the standard, well, revenue, pipeline, blah, blah, blah. But some people have actually thought it through and they know, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, know where you're going and why you're going where you're going. That question becomes a lot easier to answer if you know what that is. So.
Interesting. Yep. I think one of the ways in which I might measure success 6 months in is my calendar. If my calendar, if I'm being invited to back-to-back meetings by account executives, yep, that indicates to me that I'm doing something right. So that might be one of my KPIs.
There you go. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting asking, and for the leaders that are out there, ask that question in interviews. You'd be amazed some of the answers you get. And it gives you insight to who the person is and how they're actually going to run their business going forward, right? Because they've already got a preconception of what value is to them in the role, and that's what they're going to do, and that's what they're going to focus on. So it's a good question, and I can't take credit for the question. A leader that I had in the past asked that question one time on a panel. I'm like, I'm stealing that. That's the question I'm going to ask almost every single time now.
It's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, it's awesome. Brian, you have been so gracious with your time. If you can believe it, we've been at this 50 minutes already.
Wow.
And I have a few questions that I want to ask in closing, sort of my lightning round. But before we get to the lightning round,
Mhm.
any thoughts or anything that you wanted to touch on, but before we move into the lightning round?
Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit more on the hyper growth piece, right? Because I told you the employee count that's happened, right? With that, don't be stagnant in what you're doing. Like, and by that I mean from technology. If you're a people leader, what is the profile that you're hiring, right? That shouldn't stay the same. That should never stay the same, right? Maybe for a period of time it should, but who you're hiring and know what your team is and know what that next hire is that you want to have from a full person perspective. What technical chops do you need? What type of EQ does that person need to have in order to drive in whatever account base? What am I missing on my team that I don't have today, right? Because another one of the things is if you have a whole bunch of the same, that's not a definition of a high performing team. You're going to get a whole bunch of the same answers, right? So just make sure that you're changing that profile and you're engaging with the team and you're evolving with them as you go through that hyper growth. And make sure that you're constantly checking yourself on that, making sure that you're constantly, am I really hiring the right person? Am I really engaging with the team in the right way? And constantly doing that over and over again in a programmatic way again on how often you're going to go off and do that.
That's such good advice. And it's interesting. One of the thoughts that I had, and unfortunately we don't have time, I'm going to have to invite you back and we'll have to have a conversation. I'd love to understand and hear you talk a little bit more about what do you do to build bridges with some of the other organizations, particularly with sales, maybe with product, maybe with marketing, et cetera. And how do you use, if at all, that sort of feedback from the various teams as to how you build your team. But I'm going to have to invite you back for that
Okay.
conversation. That'll be maybe just the interaction and relationship with sales that might in and of itself might be an entire conversation. All
Yeah.
right. So I do want to be respectful of your time. We're going to try to wrap up here in just a few minutes, but I do have a quick lightning round. Now, by the way, before I get to the lightning round, I couldn't help but notice the two pictures you have behind you, which obviously are pictures from Washington D.C. and you and I are both locals. I have to ask. We have a new football team in town. At least we have a name of a new football team. Are you a fan of the Commanders or not so much?
Not. I'm not a fan of the name. I'm a fan of the Washington football team, Commanders.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So you're like me. So you're a fan of the team, not particularly a fan of the name itself.
There were so many other names we could have gone with. Why we went with the Commanders?
I'm with you. By the way,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, they're now the Washington football team, and they will continue to be the Washington football team. Look, I love the Redskins, but I can appreciate why that some people found that to be offensive. So they will forever be the Washington football team now for me. All right, moving on to the lightning round.
Yep.
This show is now called Tech Sales Advice. As you reflect on your career, was there any piece of advice that you received at any point along the journey that made a significant impact on your career? And if so, what was that?
Have mentors in all facets of the ecosystem that you support. Don't just focus in on getting a mentor in pre-sales. Don't focus just getting on a mentor in sales. At some point in your career, you're going to have to interact with marketing. You're going to have to interact with finance. You're going to have to interact with sales ops. You're going to have to interact with tech support, whatever it is. And how are you going to get across to them the value that you need from them if you don't know what the value is that they expect out of their teams, right? So having those mentors across all of that ecosystem is incredibly important. And I still have that practice today, that I've got mentors in every single part of the ecosystem, inside and outside of ServiceNow, for that exact reason, because I've never walked in their shoes. I don't know what it is, what it's like. How are you going to learn? How are you going to learn that? Well, one-on-one conversations and mentorship is one of the ways to do it.
That's awesome. Really good. It's funny. I mean, I'm grossly paraphrasing this, but don't be a one-trick pony, right? Yep. Like don't operate with blinders on. You got to look and connect broadly. Yep. Very good. All right, that's number one. Number two, you're walking onto an elevator and somebody walks on with you, turns and sees you and says, "Oh my goodness, Brian, I just saw you on LinkedIn Live. I'm starting the first day of my new pre-sales career." Any advice for me on the way up to the 20th floor?
You have 2 ears and 1 mouth in that proportion for a reason. Listen more than you speak for the first however long, and it will do you wonders.
That is such good advice. I mean, look, we can all remember that from time to time, but especially for a pre-sales professional, a sales engineer, by the way, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to show up and be the expert, right? To show up and have just the right thing to say.
Yep.
We're not listening first. More times than not, it doesn't matter what we have to say. So
nope, does not.
Really good. And I love that it was bite size. That was perfect. All right. Final question. If you could ask me one question, what might that be?
Ooh, good one. I'm going to throw it back on you. Let's say that you get back, because you're a pre-sales leader before you wrote your book and you started, tech sales advice. What advice would you give someone that's coming? I'm going to say a leader that's coming into your organization. What advice would you give them day one?
I think the number one advice I give to new leaders is this is not your time to become the super SE. And in fact, you need to have less of the spotlight and not more of the spotlight. And you now actually take a step back and you help all of your people become the stars of the show. You empower them and you enable them to become the stars of the show. And that's now your satisfaction. That's now your role. And that should be where you get your satisfaction.
Absolutely.
And by the way, I'm the first to admit that was hard for me because I loved the spotlight, right? I love the show. And it's difficult for us to take look, the spotlight shines on us in different ways, right? As a leader, the spotlight shines on us when all of our people succeed.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you have to be okay with your people being successful as your success. And your name is probably never going to be on that list of people that are successful. And that's perfectly fine. And you have to get your jollies off of that, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, and one of the things that I talk about a lot in fact, as you know, I do some work with Aslan Training and Development, and we have a program called Other-Centered Selling. And there's nothing more other-centered than moving into leadership, because now your primary purpose is the success of others, right?
Yep.
And that's really the role. So fantastic. Well, Brian, thank you so much again for your time. Any thoughts in closing? How can people reach you? I know you're more than happy to have them reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. So reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can shoot me an email as well at brian.crosby@servicenow.com. I'm always open to any and every conversation that anyone wants to have, period. I will never not have at least a first conversation with someone. Where it goes from there, we'll see. But I will always have a first conversation with everyone.
I so love that attitude. And one of the things I love about you, Brian, thank you so much. By the way, some of my colleagues have been upset with me by not saying a word about our website and some of the things that we're doing. If you're interested to hear more about tech sales advisors, you can go to the website, techsalesadvisors.com. We've also got some online training available for people who may be thinking about the profession or new to the profession. You can go to demodoctor.com. And we've got training on the 6 habits that I wrote about in the book. And of course, if you like these LinkedIn Live sessions, I encourage you to follow #TechSalesAdvice, and you'll be notified when we have these. Brian, hang around just for a minute. We're going to give you your parting gifts. But thank you so much, sir. By the way, am I correct? Is this your first time on this show with me?
Oh yeah. Yep.
I think it is. Yeah. It was long overdue. I'm definitely going to have you back, if not later in the year, certainly next year. Thank you again so much for joining. And folks, those of you who are with us online, Lillian and Sean and Nadia and all, there's too many people to count. Thank you so much. It was good to see all the chat in the LinkedIn chat there. Be well all. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Brian.